Alright, this is Mr. Gillum, and today we are moving on from algebra equality proofs to geometric proofs. So we're going to throw a few definitions in there, and kind of like the algebra proofs, even the littlest little step, if that is a proof or a property or a theorem, we're going to go ahead and throw that in there as well. So let's take a look here. Okay. 1, 2, 3, RST. Now we've talked about this a little bit as a reminder to the reflexive, symmetric, and transitive property. One equal sign is the reflexive property. It basically says if AB equals AB, angle 1 has to equal angle 1. It equals itself. The symmetric property, if AB equals CD, then CD equals AB. It's just basically it flips around the equal sign, moves one side to the other side and the other side back to the front. And the transitive property, if AB equals CD, and CD equals EF, then AB must equal EF. So you start with the first and end up with the last together. Okay, so it works the same way with angles, and that's basically what we're going to get at. It works with segments and angles. They're still the reflexive, symmetric, and transitive properties, but instead of just being like numbers, they're actual segment lengths or they're actual specific angles. Okay, so we're going to apply those properties to segments and angles today. Okay, what I'm going to do here is this. No peeking. Let's see here. We want that thing. Okay, we're going to look at this. What we're going to do is we're going to prove this conjecture. Okay, what we're going to do is prove this conjecture. And that's about as far as I want to go. Okay, so they're telling us that angle A is congruent to angle B. That's what they're telling us. It's the same amount of degrees in both. All right, so these guys are the same. That's what they're telling us. Okay, they want us to prove that if angle A is 37, then angle B has to also be 37. All right, so this one's not too bad at all. Much like our algebra proofs, we're going to go ahead and start out with the information they give us. Okay, all that information. So measure angle A is congruent to measure of angle B, and measure of angle A equals 37 degrees. We're trying to prove this last part. Angle B must be equal to 37 degrees. This is what we're trying to prove right here. All right. Now, in order to prove this, I need to know what congruent means. All right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this. Measure angle A, because I know that measure angle A is congruent to measure angle B, I know that the measure of angle A has to also be equal to measure of angle B. And that's just the definition of what congruent means. Definition of congruent angles. Okay, so instead of congruent, we're going to write it as equal. All right. Then we're going to look at this next part here. And I'm going to say, instead of measure angle A, since they give us that measure of angle A is 37, instead of writing measure angle A, I'm going to substitute this 37 degrees in for the measure of angle A. So I take out the measure angle A, I put in the 37, and that's just plain substitution. So 37 now equals the measure of angle B. And I continue on. Look at this next part here. Well, if I'm trying to prove that measure angle B equals 37, the last thing I need to do is just switch it around. Okay, I'm going to change it from 37 equals measure angle B to measure angle B equals 37. I just switch spots with these guys right here, and that is the symmetric property. And now I have proved that measure angle A must equal or be congruent, or yeah, I have proved that measure angle B equals 37 through the knowledge that angle B is congruent to angle B and angle A is 37. So a lot of just kind of common sense stuff, and you'd be like, oh, well, that's easy, but there's 4 steps. The given, okay, that's always going to be the information we know. Congruent means equal. If I know the value of measure angle A, I'm going to substitute it in so I can see specifically what measure angle B is. And then finally, I want to say measure angle B equals 37 because that's what I'm trying to prove. So I'm going to switch it around and use the symmetric property. All right. Okay. Once again, we have this nice little proof here that we're going to have to do. It says write a 2-column proof to verify each conjecture. Okay, so it's telling us, it's giving us the segment CD is congruent to segment EF. That's what it's telling us. It's saying that this guy is equal to this guy. They are equal parts. Okay, they're equal lengths. So we're going to start with the things that we know. Okay, we know that CD equals EF, or sorry, is congruent to EF. We know that CD has a length of 3y minus 9, and we know that EF has a length of 15. These three things we know from the given information. What we're trying to prove is that y equals 8. So that's what our last step is going to be at the very bottom when we're all said and done. So now, like I said before, congruent we know means equal. So that's important to put in there because CD equals EF. Okay? Segment CD is congruent to EF. We're going to change that to CD equals EF. And that's the definition of congruent segments. Okay? And that's what congruent means. We're going to take a look here. I'm going to use this information that I know about CD and EF. I know that CD is really a length of 3y minus 9. So I'm going to substitute the 3y minus 9 in for the CD right there. That's substitution. I'm also going to substitute in 15 because I know that is given information in for where EF used to be. So I'm just going to squeeze those two substitution steps into one step actually. All right, and now I have this equation that we've been solving and we practiced yesterday. I'm going to go through all the steps to solve this equation because I want to get y by itself. So this is just like yesterday's stuff once I have my equation set up. And so the addition property of equality says if I want to solve this guy, I'm going to add 9 to both sides. The additive inverse property says when I add opposites, they add up to 0. And so I'm simplifying the right-hand side. That's why I put comma simplify because I just simplified that. And then finally, if I add 0 to something, it keeps its identity. So it is the identity property of addition. And I'm getting closer to getting y by itself. When I divide both sides by 3 to help solve for y, that is the division property and the multiplicative inverse property. 3 divided by 3 is 1. And you know what? I'm going to put 1y there, and I'm going to add to my proof here. I'm going to say 1 times y is still y, so I'm going to say that is the multiplication or multiplicative identity property. Put that in there too. Throw that little guy on there. All right, and so that's really similar to what we did, just getting started and getting it to the point where we could go on from yesterday's work. That's from that step on. I think that's going to be the trick. All right, no peeking, no peeking. Okay, here we go. So finally, write a 2-column proof to verify each conjecture. So once again, we have a proof, we have the given information, and then we're trying to prove that angle A equals 90. So it tells us angle A is congruent to angle B. As soon as I see congruent, I'm thinking, okay, I probably need to put definition of congruent angles in there. Angle B is congruent to 2m. Oh, angle B is congruent to 2 times the measure of angle C, and measure angle C is 45. So let's take a look here. I'm going to start with my given information. Okay, and that's just rewriting what they tell me is true for sure. Okay, I'm going to rewrite all that information that they gave me right away. And then I'm going to change, instead of measure angle A is congruent to measure angle B, we're going to say that really they're equal. That's the definition of what congruent means. Congruent angles, they have equal degree measures. The measure of angle A is twice the measure of angle C. Now, I started with this guy, 1, 2, 3 equal signs. And so what I'm looking at is I'm comparing measure angle A to twice measure angle C. Right here. So I'm going to use the transitive property. Yes, the transitive property. Okay. Finally, I'm using my substitution because I know that the measure of angle C, they tell me the measure of angle C equals 45. So I'm just going to substitute that number in there, 2 times 45 instead of 2 times measure angle C. I'm going to simplify. 2 times 45 is 90. And so now I know that measure angle A equals 90, which I was trying to prove this whole time. So your steps, if you remember what you're trying to get at, if you know what your last step needs to be, these steps will kind of fall into place just out of necessity. So definition of congruent angles or segments is going to definitely be in there, almost every single one. They told us the first 2 parts of my congruencies, and I came up with the third part for my transitive property. I knew that if angle B is congruent to angle, or if angle A is congruent to angle B, and angle B is congruent to 2 times the measure of angle C, then I knew the first part has to be equal to the third part. That's the transitive property. Finally, I use substitution to show that measure angle A is equal to 90. And that's it. That's the whole thing for today.